Greetings, brothers and sisters. This is Sister Sonia here at Last Remnant of God's Army. I want to thank you for joining me here on my channel as we go through the Bible's book of Revelation and the book of Daniel to understand who or what is the beast from the sea. Today we're going to just discuss part 1 in this video, but stick around for parts 2 and 3, and I might make a part 4 later on, talking about the future and current events that are occurring regarding this beast system and what we need to do in order to prepare for the last days. But for now, let us examine who or what is the beast from the sea. The book of Revelation chapter 13 reads as follows: "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority." With that being said, we can gather some clues and evidences to better understand who is exactly, or what is exactly the beast. What does it exactly represent? Well, we know so far that this beast rises out of the sea. So the sea represents a peoples and multitudes, nations, and tongues, as we read in the book of Revelation chapter 13 and also in the book of Daniel. We can see that the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 crowns, and it speaks blasphemous names. So we know that 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns represent kingdoms, and we know that the blasphemous names are a reference to speaking against the Most High God. Also, in addition to this, we know that his body has that of a body of a leopard, a feet of a bear, and a head of a lion. We also could see the following along in the book of Revelation chapter 13 as we read a little further down, that the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words or pompous words and blasphemies against the Most High, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. That is also translated as 3.5 years. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place, and to those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people, which is the saints, and to conquer them. And it was given authority over to every tribe, people, language, and nation. All the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all those names who have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. So we knew, based first off of our first set of clues, that the mouth of the beast speaks with great blasphemy against the Most High God. We know based on this second clue that this beast wages war against the saints. We also know that this beast also has a global influence upon the nations as well. And all those who dwell on the earth will worship him. This is the beast, whose names who has not been found written in the Lamb's book of life, the one who had been slain from the foundation of the world. So we're getting ready to see this sort of thing happen and taking shape. So we will stick around for that, but for now, let us continue to identify who this beast is. So again, we know that this mouth of the beast speaks utter blasphemies against the Most High God. We know that it makes war against the saints. We know that it also has global influence upon all the nations. We know that this also wages war against the Lamb as well. And we also have come to note that this beast represents the body of a leopard, a feet like a bear, and the mouth of a lion, and the dragon who also gave him his power. We will also identify who the dragon is in a moment. Now, if we also turn to the book of Daniel, chapter 7, it reads the following: "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and had visions that passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. The four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it stood, and it had the wings of an eagle. And I watched until its wings were torn off, and it lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being. And the mind of human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on its sides, on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and the 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes, the eyes like of a human being, and the mouth that spoke boastfully. So here Daniel shows us well a description of the same exact beasts in which was revealed in the book of Revelation chapter 13. We could see that there is a connection between the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. But for now, let us focus on the identification of this beast and what it represents. So we know that the 4 beasts were mentioned in Daniel chapter 7. We know that the first beast was like that of a lion, and it had eagle's wings, and later was plucked up by its wings, and it was lifted from the earth, and a man's heart was given. We see that the second beast was like a bear, and it raised up on its side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth, and it was told to arise and devour much flesh. We know that the third beast was like that of a lion, and it had 4 fowl's wings or eagle wings, and it had 4 heads. It had authority, and it was given dominion. But the 4th beast was exceedingly dreadful. It was a terrible beast. It had iron teeth, it had brass nails, it had 10 horns, and eventually a little horn, which had plucked the 3 horns, would be in place and speak blasphemies against the Most High God. With this being said, we can now start slowly putting this puzzle piece together and finally identifying this beast altogether. Now, if we look at this chart right as you can see before you, we know that according to Daniel chapter 2, that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a statue. And in Daniel chapter 7, that statue represented something as well. So, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, according to Daniel 2, that statue of gold had represented the kingdom of Babylon. That is also, in retrospect, symbolically a representation of the lion. So if you ever see pictures of like the Ishtar Gate, you will come to know that they represent that of the lion with wings. Now, as we get to understand through history, it was Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar who mainly dominated and ruled the Babylonian Empire between 671 BC and 538 BC. Now, eventually they were conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire, which represents the bear. This also represents the body of silver as well. And King Cyrus and Darius had ruled between 538 and 331 BC. And eventually over time, the Medo-Persian Empire had been dominated by the Greek Empire, which is known as the leopard. And their precious metal was known as brass. So the belly and the thighs of brass was mainly the Greek Macedonian Empire. And this was predominantly ruled by Alexander the Great between 331 BC and 160 BC. And eventually we get to the legs of iron, where we talk about this dreadful beast and how the dragon gave this beast authority to come forth and conquer and dominate like none other seen before. So this is the representation of that of the Roman Empire. And this is where the dragon had given authority to this beast. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. And over time, if you look at the left chart, you'll see that over time that once after the feet and toes, which represent iron and clay, are the divided kingdoms. That's the representation of Europe. We see over time that a little horn had risen out of that divided kingdom and is going forth to speak pompous words against the Most High, to make war against the saints of the Most High, and to try to establish his throne, his empire, which did not cease. The Roman Empire still continues to this day and is going to rule for 3.5 years. And finally, to put an end to all these empires, Daniel had seen in his dream that there was a stone that was cut without a man's hands, and it was hurled to the statue. That would represent God's judgment upon the earth, God's wrath upon the earth. And eventually it would end with the stone that fills the whole earth, which is Christ's kingdom. And this kingdom will eventually be given over to the saints as well. So again, once we examine chapters 2, 7, and 8 of the book of Daniel, we come to the understanding once again that the first kingdom represents that of Babylon. And you see in the picture representation that gold was a precious metal. So gold was a very vast form of wealth, and we know this throughout history, and that was what Nebuchadnezzar had used. So that would represent that of a lion in the sense. And then later on, the bear represents that of silver, which is the next beast that came in. That's the Medo-Persian Empire. You also will see as well in Daniel chapter 8 the vision of the ram and the goat. This is the warfare against the Greek and Medo-Persian Empire that comes into play. So eventually you get to the bronze and stage, which again is the leopard and is dominated by the Greek Empire. And finally you'll get to the fourth kingdom, which represents iron, and that is the terrible beast, which is Rome. Now keep in mind, Rome has not completely fulfilled their quota regarding biblical prophecy. It's still going on even so to this very day. So the whole statue has feet of iron and clay. Remember that the rock from heaven takes down this entire statue in the end of all this. So in other words, it crushes the beast system, which is a representation of all these kingdoms. Now we're not quite there yet, but we still have yet to see the Antichrist completely fulfill his 3.5 years of ruling and reigning. Well, it's really through the 7-year tribulation period, but we'll see the fruition of the Antichrist coming into play here. So for now, we had seen that 10 rulers had come and 3 had fallen, and the Antichrist is that little horn who will come forth to completely dominate over all the nations and cause for them to worship him. And those who aren't found written in the Lamb's Book of Life, well, they're going to be in for quite a surprise at the end of the day. But anyhow, let's continue on with the investigation. So let's quickly identify who the dragon is. Now in Book of Revelation chapter 12, line 3 and line 9, I'm going to read that then another sign appeared in the heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. Interesting. And 7 crowns on his head. Remember that this beast had 10 horns, okay? And the 3 horns were dominated, and so you take that away, you get 7, okay? And therefore 7 crowns appeared on its head, okay? So the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. So we know for certain that this dragon represents Satan. And we know that also symbolically, metaphorically speaking, it also has given authority to a kingdom, a specific type of beast that will rule with iron. So if we know that this beast represents Satan, this dragon, well then who exactly does this other beast represent that we're talking about, the beast from the sea? Well, this beast is none other than Rome. The Roman Empire has dominated for a vast, long amounts of time. That's why you see that in the pictures here, that the dragon had given the Romans authority to speak pompous words against the Most High. And if you could understand through history, you'll know that they were a ruthless set of beings that had dominated most of the empire, and personally had went after Christians as well, as a form of waging war against the saints. Now, there were 10 periods in which the Roman persecution of Christians had initially begun under Emperor Nero. And Nero tried to end Christianity by killing Christian leaders. So some persecutions, unfortunately, were worse than others. And the worst and the last was the last persecution, which occurred under Diocletian, which was between 234 and 305 AD. Now, Diocletian had tried to end Christianity by simply destroying churches, killing and torturing bishops and presbyterians. And at the end, he tried to kill anybody who was considering themselves to be that of a Christian. So this is an example of how Diocletian had how persecution occurred under the ruling of Diocletian. It was when he set a whole town on fire and declared for himself those who declared at one point to be Christian, which was a whole town practically. Well, he basically burned it down to the ground. He did the same thing that Emperor Nero had done. And there were other forms of torture and punishments, like the burning of human beings that were tied up at the cross. The same form of punishment like that of Jesus, only on a worse scale, where they were actually burned alive and they were used as human torches. And some were taken also into the Circus Maximus, where it was a coliseum, an entertainment ring, where they would get torn up by lions, and they would get killed by gladiators as well. So it was this huge spectacle going on for the Romans at their expense. And this symbolically is a representation of how the beast is conquering and going to conquer against the saints of the Most High and waging the war against the saints. And this continued for quite some time. Now, eventually, in the midst of all this, there was a division of the Roman Empire. Now, it wasn't quite 100% divided yet. However, you could see evidences of this representing that of the feet of the statue that was described in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So, on one hand, you see that there was a Western Empire that was mainly ruled over Maximinian's side, and this was home of Constantinius I. And on the other side, you have the home of Diocletian, where it was the home of Diocletian's Caesar, which took place in Thessalonica. And you see the home of Emperor Diocletian in the Byzantine and Nicomedean Empire. And so these were the two battling empires to try to decide who would get the emperor's throne and take over the full authority, have the full authority over Rome. So they were becoming slowly divided as they were fighting for the throne. And so you see right here as evidence symbolically, these are the 2 feet that you see right here that represent the division of the Roman kingdom. But After the death of the Western Empire, Constantius, there was a struggle for succession. So Constantine, who was one of Constantius' sons, and his father's troops, they proclaimed him to become an emperor. So the rules, unfortunately, regarding succession at that time period, they weren't exactly clear. But while Constantine was in Gaul with his father's troops, there were other contenders for the throne and in other parts of the empire. Now, one of them was Maxentius, who had set up for himself as a ruler of Rome. Now, Constantine tried his best to avoid an open challenge or an open all-out warfare against Maxentius, but after he repeated, many attempts and threatened Constantine and tried to provoke him for war, eventually the latter had marched toward Rome, which was Constantine's troops, thus defeating Maxentius in 2 battles on the plains of Italy. Now, finally, the two had squared off on the banks of the Tiber River at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. This was probably around Milan. It is here, according to Escubia of Caesarea, excuse me for not pronouncing this correctly, that Constantine had this vision. Now, before this, Constantine was considering to converting himself, generally speaking, to Christianity, but he was undecided over this because he was conflicted with pagan traditional Roman ways of doing versus Christianity. So, but here's an account based off of what was stated according to what he had seen in his time. So it states, one day while he was in front of his tent with his officers and troops around him, he had a vision of an enormous cross of fire in the heavens. On one side of the cross were the words in the Greek language, "By this conquer." The words are sometimes given in the Latin form in hoc signo vinces, which is in translation, "By this sign thou shalt conquer." So Constantine was astonished with this wonderful vision that he had as he gazed at it until this faded away. Now, he could not understand exactly what it meant, but he was greatly troubled over this. But that night he had dreamt that Christ Jesus had appeared to him in a dream, and he was dressed in robes of dazzling white and bearing a cross in his hands, and that he promised Constantine victory over his enemies if he would simply make the cross his standard. So if he would follow him, in other words. So Constantine awakened himself from this dream, and he immediately rushed to his troops and he said, "Quickly paint the sign of the cross on your shields. I just had a vision in the sky that says, 'By this you will conquer. Let us paint crosses on our shields.'" So once they did this, they conquered and became victorious against their opposing enemies. And thus Constantine, now declaring himself to be a Christian, he had a standard which was made in the form of a cross with a banner, and it attached to it being the initial letters of the name of Jesus Christ. And the banner was called Labarum, and it was afterwards the standard of the Roman emperors ever since. Now, once after he had victory over the battle against Maxentius, he decided that by 1313 AD, he would issue an edict of Milan, which basically states, according to the words of Constantine, "When I, Constantine Augustus, as well as I, Licinius Augustus, fortunately met near Milan, and were considering everything that pertained to the public welfare and security, we thought, among other things which we saw would be for the good of many, those regulations pertaining to the reverence of the divinity ought certainly to be made first, so that we might grant to the Christians and others full authority to observe that religion which each preferred, whence any divinity whatsoever in the seat of the heavens may be propitious and kindly disposed to us and all who are placed under our rule. When I, Constantius, as well." Okay, so basically what he's saying here is that, in a nutshell, that he allowed now for this edict to overturn the persecutions against the Christians. So the effect of the edict was to allow Christianity to become legalized form of practice, and the persecution of the Christians had come officially to an end. So this would also allow for Christians who lost property by the hand of Diocletian to be returned to them, and thus Constantine would be the first emperor ever to support the Christian church. And also, the Constantine is the first emperor to support Christianity in the south. Over time, Constantine had continued as a man had continued to practice the previous traditions of the previous emperors. So he, in executing competitors and possible contenders regarding the issues of the throne of who's going to stay, even including family members of his own. So he continued to utilize and employ the official title as well as Pontifex Maximus, which means literally high priest or bridge maker. And this title he pretty much gave to himself. So over time, this had been a title for the Roman emperors between 63 BC to the 4th century as well. And Pontifex, which means priest or bishop, that had been initiated in the 3rd century. And Pope Leo the Great, which is also known as Pontifex Maximus, was initiated in the 5th century. And we also, in addition to that, out of this, get the name Pope, which is Roman Pontiff. So if you understand over time that this title is like a divine title as well, giving leeway to the inclusiveness of both religious affairs and state affairs. So Augustus Caesar obtained that title, Pontifex Maximus, as well, and thus this trickled a long time throughout history. So they had control, the Roman Empire, both civil and political affairs, which we'll see more of later on. Now, in addition to receiving Christianity as their form of religion, they had a hard time giving up pagan religious traditions and forms of worshiping. So over time, what they had done was that, according to the Romans, they adopted much of the Greek mythology into their own culture. So they took most of the Greek gods and thus gave them Roman names, and eventually they called them their own. So in Rome, government and religion were closely linked. Again, the civil affairs and religious affairs were always being interlaced with one another. It's almost like mixing iron and clay, so to speak. So Rome itself had its own story regarding creation, where it tells of how Rome was founded by two twin gods named Romulus and Remus. Romulus and Remus both wished to have found a new city, and Romulus wanted it found on the Palatine Hill, but Remus had disagreed and wanted to have this found on the Aventine Hill, and they fought, and Romulus killed Remus. Romulus then founded the city of Rome, and thus created the Roman legion as well as the Senate. Now, starting with Julius Caesar, who eventually disbanded the Roman Republic, he became a dictator, and the emperors of the Rome were also deified over time, and thus turning themselves into supposed gods, if you will. And this was their way to allow for the Roman leaders to become even more powerful. So the Roman gods in itself were symbolic representations of the state of governmental rule. And Roman citizens were thus expected to honor these gods or goddesses in private rituals or shrines in their homes. Now, this was often seen as a form of patrician regarding the upper class. And they practiced this since they were only wealthy enough to have such shrines in their villas and houses. Unfortunately, this left the plebeians and the slaves very disconnected from their traditional Roman religious practices. Now, the Romans were also honored had also honored their gods in public worship ceremonies, which were thus conducted by priests in temples. So you see, like the goddess Diana, which is mentioned in the Bible, and how Paul addresses this issue as well, and all the sorts. So and Apollo is mentioned as well, and thus sort. Minerva is also another mention in the Bible as well. So this was an issue going on regarding religious practices from the Christian perspective, but this is in turn what they had worshipped initially before Christianity became a part of their lives. So while religion had played an important role within the Roman society, the worshipping of Roman pagan gods and goddesses was thus impersonal, and it was practiced without really a great deal of emotion, so to speak. So most importantly, however, the traditional Roman religion was not inclusive for all people of Rome. It was particularly ordained for the people of high stature or of wealth to go and perform such practices, because it was believed that they were to, if they worshiped their pagan gods and goddesses, they would remain in power and thus become like that of God themselves. Now, over time, and throughout Roman history, again, they've adopted Greek gods and goddesses, like you see here in this picture. Hermes is a Greek messenger god, thus was also adopted and thus changed to Mercury, which is a messenger god. And as you can see, both of them carry this symbol representing the two serpents and with the wings on top, okay? And in the Roman culture, you see as well a goat, okay? Interesting. So, but then down the line, as the pagan Roman culture was continuously evolving with Christianity, they eventually changed it to Jesus as the messenger god, if you will. And so this is what you see more of today than you would see in ancient pagan times. So this is more of what they were trying to do as a means of concealing their worshiping their pagan gods. They simply just switched names around and concealed their true nature regarding worship. The same happened with the Virgin Mary. And if you go all the way back in history, you could see very clearly that each of these women represents the fertility goddess. Starting with Sumeranius in the Sumer Empire, she was known as the mother goddess. You're going to see in a lot of pictures, if you look her up, that she represents mother and child. They all do. They have the same meaning. And if you go forth into the Assyrian Empire, you see Inanna, also known as Ishtar from the Assyrian Empire, who becomes a dominant figure and also revered as a goddess as well, and a mother of fertility as well. You see the same thing transpire into the Egyptian culture, and you also see it transpire to Aphrodite in the Greek culture, and Diana according to the Roman culture. And then over time, when Christianity was becoming a dominant form of religious practices, it eventually converted the biblical Mary for Christianity to be adopted within pagan Roman traditions, so that way they could keep their pagan practices together while worshiping her and revering her as the Queen Mother of Heaven. This is all the same title that has the same representation of all these pagan gods and goddesses. Again, you could see that in the picture of the first Mary, she's standing on a seashell, which is like that of the Botticelli painting of the statue of Venus, okay? It's just a painting of Mary now that's been covered up. And you could see here is the Babylonian sun, which comes from Sumeranius, okay? And you see the woman crowned with 12 stars, the sun at her head and the moon at her feet. That's the Revelation 12 sign, but it's utilized in a perverse manner, and it shows that she's the one who's going to trample upon the head of the serpent in this picture. But we know in reality it is Jesus who tramples upon the head of that serpent. And so again, she's revered as the Queen Mother of Heaven. She has the halo over her. And again, the mother-child feature you see here as well. in comparison to, what you see in this picture, particularly with the Egyptian culture. It's in all cultures around the world. It's also in Indian culture, Chinese culture, South American culture. It's in all cultures. I just put these up because I was only able to fit these pictures up. But you also see how the Romans papacy over time had venerated and elevated and lifted up Mary as if she is the Queen of Heaven. Now, there is no evidence in the Bible that describes that she was to be elevated, let alone venerated as the Queen Mother of Heaven. But then again, you see the evidences of that, of the beast speaking pompous words against the Most High and making war against the saints and all the sort. But we're going to get more deeper into that at another time. But looking back on history, as Rome is invaded, and as the Roman Empire eventually was declining, it was no longer able to hold back the Germanic tribes that was standing a long line on its borders. Now, the Germanic tribes were the Vikings, and many different Germanic groups had existed. So you see the Franks, you see the Alemanni, you see the Visigoths, the Suevi, the Anglo-Saxons, Lombards, Burgundians, Ostrogoths, the Hurley, and the Vandals, okay? Those are the representations of the 10 toes. So Europe was being formulated out of this. This was a divided Roman Empire, as you could see here. And this goes with the book of Revelation, chapter 13, line 3, which says one of the heads of the beast seemed to receive a fatal wound, okay? Now, eventually, over time, this fatal wound would be healed. We will get into that much later and see what is happening. So, in a nutshell, we see a political standpoint, that is, how the Roman Empire had dominated this first beast, had dominated over many parts of Europe and the Mediterranean. So let us quickly recap what we learned so far regarding this first beast, the beast of the sea. We know that Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, as well as Daniel 8 as well, but sticking with Daniel 2 and 7, we know that, and also in Revelation 13 as well, we know that this beast represents kingdoms. We've seen that gold represented the Babylonian Empire, which is also a symbolic representation of the lion. We see that silver was also the representation of the Medo-Persian Empire, symbolically representing that of a bear. We see that brass was the Greek Empire, which represents the leopard, as well as the legs of iron, thus running down to the feet of iron and clay, which is still yet to be completed, the Roman Empire, and this represents that of a beast, and it's a reflection in the sense of that of the dragon. So this beast, we know, has 7 heads and 10 horns. Those are the kingdoms that had ruled and dominated. As we saw that the first beast was Babylon, okay, that was 1 head. We saw that the Medo-Persian Empire had 1 head, so that's 2. We saw that the Greek Empire had 4 heads, so that's 6. And then finally, the 7th head was Rome. So 7 heads, 10 horns, okay? Now the beast represents a political entity. Now the dragon represents that of Rome by giving authority to the 4th beast, okay? And it goes forth to annihilate the 1st century Christians. And this had gone on for quite some time until Emperor Constantine had a vision from Jesus Christ, which was if he by him seeing this cross in the sky as what he had claimed to see, and he had also a visitation by Jesus Christ in a dream saying, if you follow me, I'll make sure that your enemies will be wiped out. So he followed him. He had his soldiers, paint the shield with crosses, red crosses over there. We'll talk more about that another time. And then eventually, this over time, around 313 BC, that Emperor Constantine allows for Christians to legally and freely worship, because he himself wanted to be a Christian. And eventually, over time, came to a point where he was conflicted as well with other emperors that followed after him to regard whether to worship Christianity in its fullness or to get rid of Christianity and to keep the pagan Roman traditions, but eventually it was decided to keep both, and therefore the statues and the names were thus changed to biblical names. And over time, the beast, this beast had of this kingdom really had been divided into 10 kingdoms. That's the 10 horns that you see this beast representing, which is Europe. And we see those 10 kingdoms in history representing the Franks, the Alemanni, the Visigoths, the Suebi, the Anglo-Saxons, the Lombards, the Burgundies, the Ostrogoths, the Hurley, and the Vandals. Thus forth, giving one of the heads of the beast a fatal wound on its head. But eventually, this beast will eventually be healed of its mortal wound. So there you have it, folks. There's your history regarding the first beast. I hope you enjoyed this first lesson, this part 1 of the beast and recognizing who this beast is. We finally understand and identified that Rome was the first beast from the sea that had dominated many parts of Europe and the Mediterranean, and is known to speak pompous words against the Most High God, as well as conquering and going after and making war against the saints of the Most High. So now we have an understanding of that. When we get to part 2, we're going to see another, we're going to examine the second beast as well. So we want to thank you so much for joining us here on this channel, right here at Last Remnants of God's Army. Thank you once again. Stick around for part 2. I have regarding the beast from the earth, and it's going to be very interesting. I'm also going to share with you part 3, which is the mark of the beast. I'm making connections between the first and the second beast and the mark as well, and also incorporating the harlot and where does she play the role in today's society as well regarding the beasts. Okay, so thank you once again so much for this presentation. Has been really educational to me. I know it has been for me. I pray it has been for you. So stick around for part 2 once again. Thank you so much. This is Sister Sonia here at Last Remnant of God's Army. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.